Director Patel, are you aware that people inside your own bureau have a name for what's happening right now? Dan Goldman leaned into the microphone, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. They're calling it Trump's FBI war, and today I want to know exactly which side you're on. The room stopped, not figuratively. Every pen, every keyboard, every whispered conversation, all of it cut to silence in the same half second. Because Goldman hadn't asked a policy question. He hadn't asked about budget allocations or counterterrorism metrics. He had asked Kash Patel, under oath, on live national television, whether the FBI was at war and who had started it. Patel's expression didn't break immediately, but something shifted behind his eyes, a calculation, a recognition that this was not going to be the hearing his team had prepared him for. And he was right, because Dan Goldman hadn't come to this room with opinions. He had come with documents. And the first one was already in his hand. But here's what nobody in that room knew yet. Goldman had 7 more in that folder, and each one was worse than the last. To understand why this moment became the most watched congressional clip of the year, you have to understand what Goldman had been doing for the 72 hours before he walked into that hearing room. He hadn't been writing talking points. He hadn't been practicing zingers for the cameras. He had been reading every word Kash Patel had ever said publicly, every repost, every sworn statement before every court and committee, every quote from every interview. And what Goldman found wasn't a picture of an FBI director committed to institutional independence. It was a documented record of someone who had told the world exactly what he planned to do. And then, when confronted by Congress, claimed he had never said any of it. Goldman had circled the date on his calendar 3 weeks earlier. He told his chief of staff one thing. I'm not asking him about the FBI, I'm asking him about himself. Patel walked into that hearing room at 9:08 in the morning with the posture of a man who had done this before and won. Staff arranged in a row behind him like a defensive line. His communications team had prepared him for aggressive questions about personnel decisions, about restructuring, about civil liberties concerns. What nobody on his team had flagged, and this is the part that matters, was that Goldman wasn't going to ask about any of that. He was going to open that folder and read Kash Patel his own words, one by one, and ask him to defend them under oath. The first hour of the hearing moved exactly as Patel had scripted it. Republican members threw him questions designed to give him room to present his record. He cited arrest numbers. He talked about the Bureau's renewed mission. He described counterterrorism successes with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed the answers so many times they had become reflex. He looked to anyone watching like a man completely in control of the room. Goldman didn't ask a single question during that first hour. He sat still. He watched. He waited. Because Goldman understood something that most politicians never figure out. The most devastating moment in any confrontation isn't when you attack. It's when you wait until the target has fully relaxed, fully convinced themselves the hard part is over, and then you open the folder. At exactly 11 minutes and 23 seconds into his allotted time, Goldman opened the folder. Director Patel, he said, his voice carrying the calm precision of 11 years as a federal prosecutor. I want to begin with something you said publicly, not in private, not in a leaked conversation. Publicly, on record. He held up a single printed page. You stated, and I'm quoting you directly, "We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." Is that quotation accurate? The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Patel's left hand, which had been resting open on the table, slowly closed around his pen. "Congressman," he said with a careful steadiness, "that is a partial quotation, but it is correct in part, partial." Goldman had predicted that exact word. He had a response loaded and ready. "Let me complete it for you then," Goldman said, still not raising his voice even slightly. "You were describing from a position of law enforcement authority what you intended to do to members of the press who had covered you critically. You were describing a pursuit, criminal or civil, of journalists. Does completing the quotation change your characterization of it as partial?" Patel's jaw tightened. The pen in his left hand was now gripped rather than held. "Congressman, that statement was made in a specific context." Goldman cut through it without volume, without theater. The context was a nationally broadcast interview. There was no ambiguity about the targets, no ambiguity about the intent. A beat of silence. 12 full seconds. The kind that stops a room cold. But that was only the first document, and what came next made the first one look like a warm-up. Goldman reached back into the folder and produced a printout. A single page. At the top, Kash Patel's social media handle, his verified account, resharing a post depicting political adversaries being eliminated with a chainsaw. Below it, a caption Goldman read aloud without any visible reaction whatsoever. The manhunt starts tomorrow. He slid it across the table. Director Patel, is that your account at the top of that repost? Yes or no? Patel looked at the page. Something behind his eyes went very still. I had nothing to do with the creation of that content. Goldman tilted his head by approximately 1 degree. I didn't ask about creation. I asked whether that is your account reposting it. The silence stretched. That is me at the top. 200 keyboards in the press gallery started moving at exactly the same moment. And then Goldman said something that no one expected. Director Patel, I want to be very clear about what we're doing here. I'm not reading you opposition research. I am not presenting leaked intelligence. I am presenting your words, your posts, your verified public record, and I have more. The next document was a court ruling, a formal judicial finding from a proceeding in which Patel had appeared as a sworn witness. Goldman read the key line without inflection, without emphasis, without any editorial commentary at all. The judge found, and I am quoting the court's official record, he was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Director Patel, that is a sitting judge's formal written finding about your sworn statements, not a political opponent, a judge. 7 seconds of silence. Absolute silence. Patel's face had gone white, not pale, white. The muscles along his jaw were rigid. His hand had stopped moving entirely. The pen sat motionless in his grip, no longer a prop of composure, but something he was holding onto. But Goldman had saved the most important document for last. And this one wasn't about what Patel had said publicly. This one was about what he had said he didn't know. Director Patel, Goldman said, leaning very slightly forward, during your confirmation process, you testified under oath that you were not aware of any plans or discussions to take action against career FBI personnel based on their prior case assignments. That is an accurate summary of your sworn testimony. Patel nodded carefully. I was not aware of those discussions at that time. Goldman opened a fresh page. His voice didn't change. It never changed. We have internal meeting notes, Director, dated January 29th. The morning before your confirmation hearing. These notes document a meeting between acting departmental leadership and FBI leadership. The notes read, and I'm quoting, KP wants movement at FBI. KP, your initials, your documented directive. He set the page flat on the table in front of him. How do you reconcile that documentation with your sworn statement to this Congress that you were not aware? 19 seconds passed. Every Republican member had stopped looking at their staff. Every camera in the room was fixed on the same face, Patel's. And what those cameras captured was not the expression of a man formulating a defense. It was the expression of a man who had just realized the walls of a room had closed around him, and that the room had been built from his own words, his own initials, his own decisions, preserved in documents he had forgotten existed. Congressman, Patel began, meeting notes can reflect discussions at various stages. Goldman didn't let him finish. Director, you told this Congress under oath that you were not aware. These notes, bearing your initials, are dated the morning before that testimony. That is not a procedural disagreement. That is a perjury question. And I want you to understand that I am putting that on the record today, not as a political statement, but as a legal one. The word perjury dropped into that room like a stone into still water. Republican members were no longer consulting their staff. They were watching. Just watching. Goldman had one more document, a financial disclosure report. Patel had accepted $25,000 from a filmmaker with documented connections to foreign state-aligned funding networks, while simultaneously holding between $1 and $5 million in a Cayman Islands-based entity connected to a Chinese e-commerce operation, while simultaneously preparing to lead the nation's primary counterintelligence apparatus. Goldman placed the report on the table. He didn't explain it. He let it sit there. Then he looked directly at Patel and said the thing that made the entire room go still one final time. Director Patel, you believe you are going to sit in that chair for a long time. You believe you are protected. But I want to say something to you directly on this record that I think you need to hear. He paused for exactly 3 seconds. You are not in that position because of your qualifications. You are there because you are useful. And the moment you are no longer useful, the moment the administration that placed you there decides it has gotten what it needed, that protection disappears. It will happen faster than you think. And when it does, the only thing standing between you and this record, these words, these posts, these meeting notes, this judicial finding, will be the oath you took, the oath to the Constitution, not to any individual, not to any political cycle, to the Constitution. Another pause. I would strongly suggest you remember what that oath actually requires of you. Because the people in this room remember. The people watching this remember. And unlike political protection, the record is permanent. Patel said nothing. His hand had released the pen. It lay untouched on the table in front of him. His face was still pale. Whatever confidence he had carried into that chamber had been taken apart piece by piece. Not with attacks, not with accusations, but with documents. His own documents, his own words, his own initials at the top of a page, dated the morning before he swore he knew nothing. Goldman closed the folder, quietly, without theater, and said with the finality of a prosecutor resting his case, "I yield back." 4 seconds of silence followed. In a congressional hearing room, 4 seconds is an eternity. Then the noise began. Here is what we want to know, and we are asking you directly. If the FBI director has a documented public record of threatening journalists, a formal judicial finding that he is not a credible witness under oath, meeting notes that appear to directly contradict his sworn congressional testimony, and foreign financial entanglements that would disqualify almost anyone else from this position, at what point does the Senate have an obligation to act? Or has the institution already decided that the rule of law applies to everyone except the people charged with enforcing it? Write your answer below, because this conversation matters, and so does yours.